Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day. I do appreciate it. Hopefully you will enjoy this session and learn something a little bit new. Okay, so quick bit about me. I live in High Point, North Carolina. I've got my MCSC in Business Intelligence. I'm a data platform MVP. I do run the local user group here in Greensboro, North Carolina. I tweet, I blog, and SQL Swimmer, well, because I am a huge proponent of swimming and learning how to swim. So here's my 5-second soapbox. If you do not know how to swim, please learn. It is the only sport that can literally save your life. So there's my soapbox. All right, let's get into it. Quick overview of what we're going to do today. We're just going to talk about what profiling your data is, why you would want to do it, and then how you would actually do that. And we're going to talk about tools in the Microsoft stack that will allow you to do that. So first of all, what is data profiling? Simply put, it's metadata about your data. So it's a collection of, aggregate statistics about your data. If you can get distinct counts and percentages, you can get the min and max average string lengths, your numerical ranges, date ranges, all those kinds of things. It's the metadata about your data. And that's going to help you significantly if you are at the start of a project and you don't have access to specific details about your data. So now that we know what it is, why? Well, it makes your life so much easier. It is so much easier to design a database when you know what you're actually going to store in it. I mean, kind of call me crazy, but it really is. And, by creating a profile, you can better understand your source data, and that goes a long way to how the users are going to interact with your data. And most of all, prevent those data quality problems before they're introduced into your data warehouse, your project, whatever it is that you're working on. So those are the reasons why, but mostly because it just makes your life a whole lot easier down the road. So, all right, we know what it is and we know why we want to do it. So how would we do it? Well, if you are familiar with R, you can do it in R. That's great. Azure Data Catalog, it's got some really cool stuff in there, but it's kind of tedious to set up, and you have to get a subscription to Azure, and it's still on V1, and I haven't seen it get a whole lot of love. But it is out there, and once you do get set up, it is actually pretty cool, and you can use it. Informatica has a paid-for product that you can use. I don't know how many people are familiar with Informatica, but Informatica licensing is fairly expensive, so that might be prohibitive for a lot of people that are out there. Same with Talend Open Studio. They've got their product that will allow you to go out and profile your data. Again, Talend is not cheap, so keep that in mind. SAS actually has a feature that allows you to do this. I have never worked with SAS, but I've got some folks that I know that have done this, and they say it's actually pretty cool. But once again, the licensing fees to be able to use the SAS product could be quite cost prohibitive. So things to keep in mind. And then Power BI, you can actually do this with Power BI. And then finally, SQL Server Integration Services. There is actually a data profiling task that allows you to profile your data. So what we are actually going to talk about today are these last two, about how you can use Power BI or integration services to profile your data. And with that, we're going to start a demo. Do I have any questions out there? Or am I good to keep going?
You're good.
Okay. All right. We'll keep going then. All right. So our first one is a Power BI demo. So we are going to take a look. Here is a Power BI file, Power BI desktop file that I've created. And you can see it's just got some simple stuff over here, not anything too complicated. And when we go look at the edit queries, this is where you can change your data types, you can remove columns, you can do all that kind of stuff. But there's not anything in here that tells you about your actual data. So how you actually, it's a preview feature. So if you go to File, Options and Settings, Options, and then if you go to the preview features and click the Enable Column Profiling little checkbox under the preview features on the right-hand side, and you click OK, you get this wonderful little box that says, oh, it's a preview feature. You have to close and restart Power BI. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that, and we'll start it back up. And it just takes a second here. We'll just go back into the same one that we were in. And now let's go take a look at our queries so we can see all the profile information. So when you first open this up, you're like, well, there's nothing different here. It looks exactly the same. When I look at every single one of these, it looks exactly the same. So I am going to show you the difference. And the difference is right here, this little tiny green bar. That is your indicator that you have turned the column profiling on. So not super helpful, but you can go in and say, if you hover over it just right, it gives you a little bit more information about your data that's in that column. And you can go look at the dates, but again, you have to hover over it just right. So while that's okay, that's kind of hard to use, especially if you've got a pretty big resolution on your computer. So if we come over here to View on the ribbon and say click the column quality, ooh, look at that, it's magic. Now you have that stuff and you don't have to actually hover over that little green line. And then you can also select column distribution and get some fancy stuff right here. So there you have it in Power BI. So it gives you some information, but not a lot. So, we've got our distinct and our unique. We've got anything, if there's a pattern, if we've set it to be a number, how many are empty, all of that. So we have some of the metadata that we talked about, but we don't have any information about like our string lengths, like our min and our max string lengths, or anything like that. So this is a good first effort, and Microsoft is doing a really good job of churning out changes really fast for Power BI. So I would definitely keep an eye on this. And if you have nothing else to be able to profile your data with, this is a really good starting place, and it's absolutely free. Power BI Desktop, absolutely free. So good place to start. So we're going to go ahead and close this, and we'll come back to, one thing I forgot to show you is, if we come over, look over here, so down here at the very bottom, you will see this profiling based on the top 1,000 rows. So by default, you're only getting the top 1,000 rows. And you're thinking, well, what if I have 10 million records? That's not really a very good sample size. Well, in that case, you can actually come down here, and even though it looks like it's just a status, like the columns and the rows, if you hover over it, oh, look, it's magic. You can actually click it, and you can change it to look at the entire data set instead of just the top 1,000 rows. So that's pretty slick. So just keep that in mind, that it defaults to the top 1,000, but you can actually force it to look at the entire data set there. So let's get back to our demo or our slide deck over here. And Power BI. Oh, that's interesting. I got a nice little, can you guys still see my screen?
Yes, we can. It's
Okay.
blue, but
Okay, yeah, it kind of freaked out on my side. I'm not sure exactly. My video adapter is kind of freaked out right now. So Power BI, it's good start. It's in preview, so you have to turn it on. By default, you only get the top 1,000 rows, but you can change it. You don't get any string length statistics about that, and your summary statistics are incomplete. So summary statistics are things like when you're dealing with numbers, like your mean, your median, your standard deviation, those kinds of things. So let's, oh look, is it back to white now for you guys?
yes.
Okay, well look at that, it's magic. All right, so that's with Power BI. So are there any questions about the Power BI piece?
No questions on Power BI.
Okay, all right, well then we are going to jump right into the data profiling task in integration services. So before you get too excited, there are some requirements. The biggest one is that the only data source that is currently supported is SQL Server. So it's like, oh, that's where I usually hear the collective, oh man. But there are a couple things that you can actually do. So if you are working with tons of flat files, you can always import those flat files into a SQL Server database and then point your data profiling task at that. And you can kind of work around that. But again, SQL Server is the only data source that is supported. So, and then the other setup kind of requirement thing is that the user that will be doing the profiling, you need to make sure that they have read, write, and create table permissions in the temp DB. So that should be a little heads up that, yes, this is actually using TempDB to do all this work for you. And then the last part of the profiling task is to analyze it. So you set it all up, you run it, and then you have to analyze the actual results. So with that, we are just going to jump right into the demo and see how this works. So I have a Visual Studio project, and I have created all of my connection managers. So there are my connections to my data source, which is a SQL Server database. And then I have all of my results that I have already created connection managers for. So I'm just going to go and open up my first package here. And if you have no idea where the data profiling task is, if you go to your SYS toolbar, it is actually really close to the top. So I've used integration services since it was released in 2005. And I'm sure at one point I probably knew that this task was here. But, you know, I'm typically either doing a data flow or an execute SQL task or a script task. Those are pretty much my go-tos. So I hardly ever notice anything else that's down here. I mean, look at that. You can do Hadoop stuff now. Geez, I had no idea. So we're just going to go ahead and drag this over here to our canvas. And we've got this X here on the right-hand side. So that means that there's something missing. It's not quite right. It's not ready to use. So we're going to have to configure this. So you can double-click it, and it will open up. Or you can also right-click and say Advanced. Well, let's just show you. You can say Edit, just like that. You get the same window either way. So your destination, we want to dump it out to a file. So that's the other thing with using the data profiling task. The output of your profile will either be as a file or a variable. So, and as you can see, we can select a file or a variable. Right now, I'm going to use a file connection, and I'm just going to pick one that I already have. And you can choose whether you want to overwrite it or not. We are going to overwrite it if it already exists. And then there's this great button down here, Quick Profile. And that's what we're going to start with. Now, here's the other caveat and the requirement is that you have to use an ADO.NET connection. You can't use your standard OLEDB. So that's another thing. Not that big of a deal, but just just be forewarned of that. So once you select your connection, you can actually come down and take a look at all of the tables that are available to you. So you can either select all of the tables, or you can select a single table. So on this dialog box here, those are your only options. It's all or one. That's it when it's talking about the tables. And then here are all of the different profiles that it can actually compute. You've got your null ratio, statistics, your value distribution, your length distribution. So those are things that Power BI didn't have, is the value distribution and the length distribution. So we're already ahead of the game. And then they also have a pattern profile. So it can pattern, it can see if it detects any patterns in your data. So that's actually kind of cool. I'm just going to leave it with all of the defaults here. I'm going to click OK. Excuse me. And that popped us over to this other tab, this Profile Requests tab. And you can see the profile type and the request that we're going to do. And when you highlight one of these, it shows you additional information down in the Properties dialog box below. So, you know, we're going to do the null ratio. If we look at statistics, we can get all the different statistics, the length, the value, so each one of those. And there are other options that you can set. So we're just going to leave that, and we're going to say, okay, that's what I want. And our little X, it went away. We're good to go. All right, let's just run this. So we're going to save this. And in Integration Services, when you are on the Control Flow tab, you can either just right-click and say Execute a Task, or you can run the whole thing. So because we only have one task in here, I am just going to execute that specific task that we just created. And it's going to go out and it's going to do its little magic. And it's done. Great. That's awesome. Fabulous. It was super fast. But wait, where are our results? How do we actually view our results? Well, remember we wrote it to a file. That was the we selected instead of the variable. So there are two ways you can actually access the file that was created. You can, again, go into your task, and you can click on this button right here, Open Profile Viewer. And when you do that, it opens up this nice standalone application that's got, so there's your server, there's your database, here's the table, and then here are the profiles and the information that's associated with each of those profiles that's shown up over here. So we've got all of this cool information. So now we can look at, you know, our min and our max length. We can tell it whether we want to, you know, ignore leading or trailing spaces. We can look at our null ratios in here, statistics. So anything that's a number or a date, we're going to get our statistics on those two things. And then value distribution. So that was really pretty easy. Just a couple of clicks, and you have all of this information. Well, I can hear your people in the background saying, okay, well, that's great, but what if I need to, you know, I don't want to have to use Visual Studio to look at the profile. I want to be able to take that XML file and give it to somebody else, because that's all it is an XML file. So if we come over here, we can take a look, and I will show you that it really is just an XML file that we created. Oh yeah, everybody loves XML, right? Greatest thing since sliced bread. All right. So, but what if, like again, it's just an XML file, but that's kind of hard to read. What if you need to pass this on to somebody else? Well, you can absolutely do that, because this data profile viewer is a standalone application. So all you need to do is go out to your program files, SQL Server, DPS, and so I'm using SQL Server 2017, so my version is 140. If you're using 2016, it's going to be 130, and so on. And just know that it's in the DPS bin folder, And it's right here. It's just a standalone executable file. So let's come back over here. Let's close this. Let's come back over here. Let's cancel out of that. And if we come over here and if we just double click this, it opens up. The only bad thing about it being a standalone viewer and not using it through Visual Studio is that it doesn't automatically open the file that it just created. But you can tell it to. You can say, all right, let's go find it. Well, there's that file that I just created. So let's open it up. And yep, sure enough, there it is. So that's pretty slick. That's pretty slick. It gives you all of that information. So let's come back. Now, one thing that we did when we started this is we went through and we just used that quick profile button to start. So instead of doing that, let's create a new one. And we'll just leave it as data profiling task 1 because that's an awesome naming convention and it will be very meaningful to a lot of people. So let's go ahead and look at our orders this time, and let's go ahead and overwrite it if it exists. And instead of using the quick profile button, if we just go to profile requests, we can come over here and we can select the type of profile that we want. So let's do our null ratio. And when we highlight that, it gives us the properties down below, where here you can come down and you can actually select the individual ones that you want. So we're doing orders this time. We're going to tell it to use all of the defaults, and it's the null ratio. So we're just going to say, okay. My machine is a little slow. Come on. So it's going there. All right, well, I'm not sure what is going on. Oh, you have to specify all the column names. Well, darn it all. And for some reason, it is not letting me do this. So what I'm going to do is we'll just go back to the one that we'd created earlier with the quick profile. My machine is running super duper slow. So you can see where you can select. So that's where, all right. So let's come back over here. And when we select the column, we can say all the columns, or we can pick a specific column. So that was my bad. I've slept since the last time I've done this demo, so I apologize for that. All right, so we're doing a null ratio. Let's look at our order date and say, okay, and that goes away. Again, let's go ahead and save this. Let's go ahead and execute this one. It's already done, super duper fast. And just for brevity, we're going to go ahead and open it up here within Visual Studio. Make this a little bit bigger. And look at that, our order date. It's never null. So that's a good thing to know. If you are building a warehouse and you're not sure whether order date is always populated or not, now you know. Pretty slick. So one thing that you can also do with this is, let's come back. Let's look at this, is you can actually drill down into the data to get even a little bit more detailed information. So if you open up your profile viewer, oh, and it's stuck on my, oh, because I overwrote orders. Silly me. So let's just do a quick profile on our person address table. Let's say, okay, let's run this. come back over here. And we edit it, and we open up our profile viewer. All right. So now you can see we've got information for 2 different tables. And when you come in here, there's this little thing right here. So it tells you, so this little button right here is called drill down. So you can actually drill down and get more detailed information. But just know that when you do that, it defaults to initially to the first 1,000 rows, but you can change it to pull back all rows when it does the drill down. So just remember, this is actually going against live data. So if you have this pointed at a production system, that is going to go directly against your production system. Just buyer beware on that, you could take a performance hit depending on what you're doing. So, and I've picked the wrong, all right, so if I pick this one, that one doesn't let me do any drill down. Here we can do a drill down on this one. And for some reason, it does not like what I'm doing. So we're not gonna do it, but know that you can actually drill down and see specific information in there. So that's all well and good, gives you great information, but there's a lot of clicking in there that you had to do. And it was either, if we did the quick profile, we could select all the tables, or we could only select one table. But if we went and created each profile individually, we actually had to doing a lot of clicking for each specific one that we wanted to do. So just know that if you need to do this a little bit more dynamically, you can actually do this. Just know that you are going to have to build dynamic XML within XML. So, just when you thought, your mind couldn't be blown anymore, you can do that. So, but that's all a super manual process with that file and having to pass it back and forth to somebody. So what happens if we want to automate this process? Well, we can do that as well. And you can do that by, instead of using the file, you can send it to a variable. So I've got another package that I've created here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our scenario here is that we are going to load a warehouse. And we are going to take information from our address table, and we're going to load it into a staging table. But we're only going to load it into that staging table if there are no more than 95% nulls. So as long as our null ratio is less than 95%, we will go ahead and load it. If it's higher than 95%, then we need to stop and not load it, and we need to do some other operation, whether that's send an email to somebody, whether it's write a log, whether it's stop the whole process, whatever. So that's the scenario that we're setting up here. So I have got my data profiling task here. We're going to look at the address, and as you can see, it's going into a variable this time that I've already created. We're just going to take a look at the null ratio profile. That's all we want to look at. So we're all good there. And now I have a script task that's actually going to look at that information and compare it to our acceptable null ratio. That's all it's going to do. So if the null ratio is not acceptable, it's going to follow this left path because as you can tell, I've got a precedence constraint along with an expression. So we're going to check to see whether our null ratio is greater than our acceptable null ratio. And if it is, we're going to say, oh, something went wrong, which is why I've got this in red over here. Otherwise, we're going to follow this path where our null ratio is less than or equal to the acceptable null ratio. So, and then if it is, then we're going to go ahead and we are going to truncate our staging table, and then we're going to load it. So let's take a look at what we have in our database. And before I do that, do we have any questions out there?
Not an SSIS component, no.
Okay, all right.
We can get some Power BI ones after you moved off Power BI, but I'll save those till the end.
Okay, perfect. So here's what we have. So I've just done a select against my address table. Now, normally you're going from one database to another database. I have everything living in the same database. I'm just using different schemas to identify these. So, here is my source table. You can see my address line 2. It's not populated a whole heck of a lot. And then right now there's nothing in my staging address table at all. So let's go ahead and run our package here and see what happens. So I put a break on this so that we could come down here and we could examine our variables. Let me pull this up a little bit. Whoops. Oh. Make it a little bit easier. So here, did I pass it already? I did. I scrolled too fast. There it is, right here. So here is our acceptable null ratio, and here is what we actually came up with. Oh, whoops. I'm not so good at drawing. That's okay. I can type really well, though. So it's at 98%, but 95% was our acceptable. So we're just going to go ahead and let this continue on. So I take my F there and continue, and it's done. So normally I have this send an email or do a pop-up, but I've added the breakpoint so that you could see, because I would always forget to check my email, or I would forget that the pop-up was there. So, all right. So typically what happens in this kind of situation is you've sent some notification off to whoever takes care of your master data management stuff. And they come out here and they say, oh yeah, you know what? We need to make some updates to that address line too. So what I'm going to do is I just have a script I'm going to update every 7th one. And no, you should update all the ones that actually need to be updated, not just every 7th one. This is for demo purposes only. So now when I take a look at what we've got, our source table, the address line 2 is a little bit more populous than it was before. And of course, our staging table is still empty. So let's go back to our package and let's run it again. So we've stopped it again. We're going to take a look. And here is our acceptable null ratio this time. And look, I can do square boxes. And now it's 84% compared to the 95. So we know where we're supposed to be. So we're just going to keep going. And it went through, and when we look, sure enough, it loaded 19,614 records. So let's go ahead and stop this. And if we come look at our data again, look at that. Sure enough, we have 19,614 records that we've just loaded in. So that's pretty cool. So there's an example of how you can actually automate that and not have to pass those XML files back and forth. So it's pretty cool thing that you can do there. And once again, if you want to do even more, so more automation, and you want to build all of these profiles dynamically, you can definitely do that. You just need to use, a for each loop and loop through. So if you have a list of tables or columns, you can make 2 loops, make 3 loops, make as many loops as you want to be able to dynamically create the profile that you need. Just remember that you are going to be creating dynamic XML within XML. So it can get a little bit hairy. There's actually a really good blog post out there that John Welch wrote. Gosh, must be, I think it's almost 8 years ago, but it is still relevant today. And when I need to do this, I actually refer back to it. I think I even have it bookmarked because nobody likes to write XML, especially dynamic XML. So there we have it. So let's go back to our slide deck.
Angela, we've got 2 questions if you want,
great,
to do with the profile. So the first question is by Kenneth. He wants to know, can you define more failure constraints if a value isn't the correct amount of characters, or a value is 0, or is null the only check that you can add?
You can, anything that you can build a profile for, you can build a check constraint for. I just did null ratio because that was super easy, but any of the profile information you can get. I can show you the script that I wrote to get this if people want to see it.
Yeah. Well, that's good, because the next question is from Paul, who says, can you just explain a little bit more what you're doing with that null ratio check? So next question lined up nicely.
Awesome. All right, checks in the mail, Paul. Thank you. So give this a second to open up. Come on, baby, you can do it. We got people watching. Come on. There it goes. All right. So we're just going to edit the script over here. All right. So you do have to add some things. You've got to add your namespaces and all of that kind of stuff. You need to tell it, you know, so we were looking at the address line 2, and we're looking at the, you know, the column null ratio profile. So those are things that you're going to have to add. And then you just basically come down here and grab all of your stuff, see what you want to do. You get the null count, you get the row count for the table, and then you're just, you know, computing what it is and what it needs to do. So, and it returns that value back. That's all I'm doing, is returning that value back so that I can compare it to my variable. So I'm assigning it back to the variable. So if we come out of here and see, there's my read-only variable was the whole XML file that we passed in that is produced from the data profiling task. And then my write variable was the address line 2 null ratio that I'm pulling out. And then I'm comparing to my variable that I already have created right here, my null acceptable ratio, acceptable null ratio. Does that cover it, or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, there hasn't been any follow-up questions. I think you're good.
Okay. All right. Any more questions about the integration services piece?
And Paul says he's good.
Okay, great. All right, so let's get back. So reviewing the, oh, that is, I don't know about you guys, but that just kind of makes me crazy. So we'll just go see if that fixes it. Okay, so quick review on if using integration services and the data profiling task if you want to profile your data. So SQL Server is your only data source that you can use. So that's kind of a bummer. But again, that will help if you have flat files. You can always import them into SQL Server and then look at the stuff and create your profiles that way. I do that all the time. We have clients who FTP files in, and they say, yeah, we don't know because we get this from a vendor, so we don't know what the actual lengths are supposed to be, so you'll just have to figure that out. Well, that's how I do it. My secret has been revealed. So you can view the results either within Visual Studio, or you can use that standalone viewer and pass it off, pass the XML file off to somebody else who is probably more in line with an analyst or your master data management person, so that they can kind of clean data up and get an idea of what's there. And then again, you can use the script task, and you have to write some XPath queries to make your decisions based on what the profile results return. So it's a little cumbersome, but the first, all you'll have to do really is set it up once, and then you can essentially repeat that over and over, just rinse and repeat with different tables kind of stuff. Super easy. So, and here is some of the, if you wanted to do it dynamically, kind of an example of what you're going to be doing. So you've got, you know, you need to have variables for your schema name, your table names. If you're going to do it based on a specific column, you would need one for a column as well. So here's how you're going to be writing that dynamic XML within XML. That's what it looks like. And again, John Welch used to work for Pragmatic Works. I think he's gone over to SentryOne with the software purchase there. I still refer back to that blog post that he did like 8 years ago. It's awesome. And then all my references here. So those are links, and it was in the handout. So if you want to go look at all of that stuff, just click the links in the handout and it will take you right there. So there were some questions about the Power BI. Do you still have those?
Yes. Okay. So the first one was from Paul. Paul wants to know, when you did the profiling in Power BI, he wants to know, does it send the sampling query down to SQL itself? Or, so if we had a large table, for example, of 10 million rows, would it sample the data from SQL, or would it pull all 10 million records into Power BI first and then sample them there?
Okay. So Power BI, it goes all of the data. All right. So it starts with 1,000, the top 1,000 records, but you can use that little click box. So let me come back to Power BI. So if we come over here, you can see if we can select it whether we want to do it based on the top 1,000 or the entire data set. So by default, it's the first top 1,000. Now, when you're using the data profiling task for integration services, it looks at the entire data set to come up with that profile. So those are the big differences right off the bat, is that if you just want to get, kind of a small idea, you could use Power BI. But if you want to get, you can still use Power BI to get the whole data set. You just have to run it again after you change the little checkbox.
Awesome.
Do that. And then,
yep. Cool. Paul says, thank you very much. Okay. The next question comes from Regina. She asked, if you said that the stats in Power BI can be modified, not 100% sure what she means there. Maybe you understand?
So say it again.
She says, did you say that the stats in Power BI can be modified?
I'm not sure I understand the question, so maybe we can have her clarify if she's still on.
If you want to do that. In the meantime, I've got a question.
Okay.
So SQL, Azure SQL Server sort of recently introduced that data discovery and classification.
Okay.
How might that complement or differ from data profiling?
So I haven't played with that yet, so I don't have an answer.
All right, I'm that guy. Okay, so basically what it does is it classifies your data, so it can pick up all the PPI kind of information in your data. So it can identify address information. Now, so it doesn't speak to the data quality per se, but it's pretty good at. So that might be something else to augment your. But then obviously it has to go into Azure SQL Server.
Okay, very cool.
Something new for you to play with this weekend.
Yeah, yeah, because I don't have anything else to do this weekend.
not at all. Guys, if there's any other questions, otherwise we'll let you go.
Okay. Well, I had a great time, and thank you guys for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And there's my contact info, and again, that's in the handout as well. So if you want to reach out, feel free. I'd love to hear from you.